Mini episode 1471 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Another great position in this draft as well, cornerback. You've got a couple kids here that really project to be studs. And again, this is very, very, very important for teams because it's the inverse of what we were just talking about with wide receivers here. The fact that this game has never had a deeper crop of great wide receivers, it is all the more necessary to have cornerbacks to be able to match up with them. Some of the top ones in the group this year, some of whom you will be seeing going in the top 10, probably more than one. Derek Stingley Jr. of LSU, Ahmad Gardner of Cincinnati, Andrew Booth of Clemson, Trent McDuffie of Washington, and Roger McCreary of Auburn. Jason, again, this is a group of guys that they're going to be very, very, very valued for their ability to cover, quite frankly, some of the players we were just talking about across the other side of the ball at wide receiver.
Yeah, this is another position group where you don't necessarily have to be sitting at the top spot to really come away with something nice. And I love, especially at the top, between Stingley and Sauce Gardner. It literally, wherever you are, if you want aggressive ball hawk, you go one way. If you want a technician, you go the other way. But you can't lose. So the guys at the top, I'm absolutely just blown away by. I think both of them are going to sort of be in that almost Patrick Peterson, Denzel Ward, maybe not quite Jalen Ramsey. He's a little bit more physical, but Stingley, Gardner, I think are great. I think McDuffie and we got to mention Booth are probably going to play better than their draft position would suggest, and they might as well be almost fringe top 10 guys. And then, you know what's interesting is I do like the kid from Auburn, but Khair Alam from Florida is interesting as a bigger, longer guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one, I can't believe I'm going to say this because we don't normally say nice things about these people, but Daxton Hill out of Michigan might just be one of those guys that can play. You know, maybe he could start at cornerback 2, but he could also play nickel, and he could probably also split some time at free safety in a pinch. So, yeah, depending on what you want, what system you're running, what you're expecting, you need man press, are you more worried about, dropping in zone? What are we talking about? Because whatever it is, I can find you somebody that fits that perfectly somewhere in the first 2 rounds. And then, even beyond the first 2 rounds, there's some quality depth here, too. Now, the guys you're going to get in the 3rd and 4th round, they may not be Pro Bowl caliber, but they're going to be guys that if you have a shutdown corner on the other side already, it's going to be a real nice compliment. So, cornerback is nice. I don't think they're can't miss, and a lot of guys have 1 or 2 things that you don't love, but by and large, can't miss is a stretch, but cornerback is a nice position group in this draft.
It is, and it's one of the rare ones, as we said, because there's a lot of positions in this draft, quite frankly, that are crappy. But this ain't one of them. This has got some top-shelf guys. And, Chris, I would go so far as to say a couple of the guys here at the top of the position here, if you're talking about Stingley or Gardner, I would go so far as to put the word prototype on them.
Yeah, I think Stingley and Gardner are the can't-miss in this class. And actually, I have Stingley Jr. as my top overall player in the entire draft.
Wow.
I think he's very special, and I think someone's going to get one hell of a player that even potentially could play on both sides of the ball if he needed him to.
in a pinch. He is really, really good. And I think he's going to be an all-pro very quickly, if not Pro Bowl in his first year. He's a stud. But I agree. I mean, this is a deep class of players with a lot of skill set. And, a lot like, we were talking about the wide receivers and how every year we seem to have a great crop of wide receivers. And I suspect that's because of all the quarterback camps and the 7-on-7 camps and all these throwing camps. As we've gotten better at developing kids younger at the quarterback position, I think it's important that we remember that they're throwing to somebody. So these skills camps and these developmental camps that are really focused on skill positions, I think you're really starting to see that trickle down into beyond just, say, the quarterback. They're throwing to somebody. And so now you've got kids and they're being coached better earlier, even at the wide receiver position. So we're getting better players earlier. And I think that's spilling into the cornerback position as well, in terms of talent. You can go even into like the third round, in terms of these corners and a guy like Tariq Woolen out of UTSA, UTSA, the Roadrunners. He's 6'4". He ran a 4.26. There's a guy with long arms that you could, potentially see. Might need a year or two to really blossom, but, you get him in the third round. He's certainly probably starting in year 2, and would potentially enable you to, with the speed and the length of his frame and his arms, to be able to cover those taller wide receivers that sometimes give you trouble. There's guys all over the place here in this group, and guys with speed and guys that can cover. I mean, I see a lot of 4.3s and 4.4s, looking at that position group.
It really is incredible, the class that they have this year, the depth in the class, and it is really something special. Also in the defensive secondary here, as I rattle off a couple of other players that are going to be drafted very high, certainly players worthy of being drafted in the top 10, whether they go there or not. This first one, I believe, will, and he will potentially go in the top 5. As I say, also from the defensive secondary, safety Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame, one of the by far best players in this draft. You've got center/guard Tyler Linderbaum out of Iowa, and Georgia linebacker Nakobe Dean. Certainly his number was being called a lot in that aforementioned national championship game. And so these are some players that are very marquee type guys that will be going in the first half of night 1, to be sure. So I want to turn it to each of you two guys and talk about some other guys at positions we haven't discussed yet. So players that are on your radar, I'll start with you, Jason.
This is actually probably my favorite segment of this year in particular, because everyone's going to default to rank who's number 1, who's number 2, and all that shit. But there are some names throughout that may or may not be number 1 that I find really intriguing, and I think as we go through the draft, and you've already mentioned one of them, where these guys go will likely dictate the flow of the picks to follow. Not all of them, but some of them. And Kyle Hamilton's number 1 on that list. Where does he go? Is he going to go really high, top 5? Because the next you shake some things out and some guys are going to fall that you wouldn't expect to. Or is someone going to get a steal if he slept on and he's still there after, say, pick 10? Devin Lloyd out of Utah I like a lot, especially if you're looking for that more new NFL-type linebacker who is as good in coverage as he is blitzing. I think you're really going to like him. He feels up and down like a Belichick pick, so I'm worried about that just for the rest of the league. Christian Watson is probably my favorite player in the entire draft from, I'm not joking, North Dakota State. I think anybody who's interested in wide receiver needs to spend some time watching this kid. 6'4", 220 ran, a sub 4.4. He has every tool you could possibly hope to get in a prospect, and it's just a matter of whether or not he is developed properly. Another big one is coming back to Georgia. You got the two-headed monster at defensive tackle. George Davis, who was probably the more sexy pick, but Devontae Wyatt is right up there with him. The problem is some entity, I don't know if it was a team or a reporter, but someone unearthed that he had multiple domestic violence charges at some point in time. So that's probably going to have him fall. And that brings me to my favorite guy not many people are talking about. And I don't know where he fits, I'll be honest. Fit is always a concern at defensive tackle specifically. I don't know where he fits. I just love his motor. I love his attitude. And every time you put the tape on, you expect to see him pop off. And that is Perrion Winfrey from Oklahoma, who I don't expect to go in the first 2 rounds. Mid-second round is earliest. But again,
he's a guy I'd love to see the Browns grab in the 3rd round, by the way.
I wasn't going to say it, but hey, I'll fall in line right behind you on that. If he's there at 44, I'd love to see that happen. But yeah, the bottom line here is this is not one of those drafts where if you miss on the number 1 guy, you're completely screwed. There are guys in here that are going to fit roles and going to fit schemes, and it's going to be fantastic. And Perrion Winfrey is just one of those guys. It might be a name you're not familiar with. Look him up, though, because he jumps off the tape. And you see that a lot. You see that a lot throughout this. It's not top to bottom. You got to know what you're looking for. But if you know what you're looking for, you will probably find some gems in this draft.
I think it's interesting, and I wanted to highlight this, that the one group that we haven't touched on, and I think there's a reason for it, is I don't have anybody worthy of being picked before the 3rd round, and that's the tight end group.
Right. They suck.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very weak tight end group. If you're in desperate need of a tight end, you're out of luck this year, and there's nobody worth drafting before the middle of the 3rd round. And so, if anyone's sitting at home wondering, how come I am talking about my favorite tight end? Well, none of them are our favorite tight end. So I've got a few players that I like, and Jason touched on the thing that I know that we talk about every year, which is where they're drafted and how important that is. And I think I look at some of these quarterbacks, and I know we kind of crapped on them earlier in the show, but there's a few guys there that could develop if going to the right system in the right place and given a year or 2 to develop properly, that could be good pros. I know I'll get accused of homerism when showing a little love for my guy Sam Howell from North Carolina. All last season I would text Rick that 7 is greater than 6. And his game reminds me a lot of Baker, other than the fact that he's faster and more mobile and can run the football. Otherwise, they're very similar in terms of their size, their arm, their skill. I mean, Baker's probably a little bit more accurate thrower, but he's also like a guy with club feet and can't move around. Howell can move the football with his feet, and that's what's exciting to me. So he's a guy I think that going to the right system in the 2nd round, early 3rd round, develops for a couple of years. If he's not a starter, could have a long career in this league. Running backs. We haven't talked about running backs. Not a great class.
No.
But there's a couple guys there I like. Kenneth Walker's the 3rd out of Michigan State. Transferred in from Wake Forest, had a great college career, ran a sub 4.4. I really like what he brings. I know a lot of people are high on Breece Hall out of Iowa State. Very good player. A guy that, you talk about a gem at the running back position. Let's talk about Pierre Strong out of South Dakota State. Prototypical size, well, he's a little short. He's about a 5'11", but 207, ran a 4.37. Great production in college. He's a redshirt senior, so he's been in college a long time. But I really like when you look at some of his highlights in his tape. I really like how he runs the football. There's a guy that you're going to get probably, and you probably can get him in the 5th round, even 4th round, 5th round. It could be a really good, really good running back for you. The Georgia tackles I like. I think we've already covered all the wide receivers. Let's talk a little specialist. Because Rick, you and I have talked about off the air about, would it be crazy to draft one of these kickers, in the 4th or 5th round? Would it really be crazy?
No.
I don't think so, because I think that most fans underestimate just how important those specialist positions are. So when you talk about a kid like Cade York out of LSU, probably worth a 5th round pick for sure. He could go 4th round. This is a copycat league, and teams saw what the Bengals did with McPherson last year out of Florida, and what a great pickup he was. And I know, our favorite team, the Browns, it hasn't worked out drafting kickers, but I think it's a thing you just keep trying, and you get those late round picks, and you just keep swinging for the fences. So Cade York is a kid I really do like. And frankly, talking about a kicker, how do you not like the kid out of Texas? Dicker. Cameron Dicker's a kicker. Come on. It's fantastic.
It writes itself, Jerry.
It really does. Who was the kid the Browns signed late in the year last year? We've got him on the team. What was his name? It was like Miss It or something like that. I forget the kid's name. He had some name that was like, really? That's the name of the Browns kicker?
Right.
So listen, you can't pass up Dicker the kicker in the 7th round. Let's talk about Areza there, the San Diego State kid who can apparently punt a football for like 17 miles.
Right.
Sounds like the only knock on him is the fact that he struggles with directional kicking. And I guess if you can boom it 80 yards every time, what does it really matter? But it sounds like something that's what the coaches should have to work with him on. There are some people think that kid, a punter, could go as high as the 3rd round.
And that he should.
I'd be shocked.
And that he should.
I would be shocked at the 3rd round, because I think there are GMs that will go, I want to take the punter. And then there's someone in that room will look at him and go, you're about to take a punter in the 3rd round. You're going to take a punter in the top 100. Like, you're going to get crucified. So I think there'll be GMs that think twice about it, and will not think twice in the 4th round. But in the 3rd round, they'll have pause to pick a kid like that. But so there's some interesting little prospects out there in some of these sort of non-traditional positions, and as much to Butch Davis's chagrin, I don't think there's a long snapper worth drafting in this draft. So, probably a bunch of undrafted free agents there at the long snapper position. But overall, I think this is a C to C minus type of class overall. Again, as Jason has so astutely pointed out, guys that can fill roles in different types of tasks. You can find a lot of those guys, but you've got to be a bargain shopper, and you've got to be a smart GM that knows where to look. And if you do that, you can have a pretty good draft here in 2 weeks.
Yes, you can. And the other thing I would say about the punter as well is that this is the rare instance of somebody who is a game breaker, somebody who can drive after drive after drive really change the dynamic in terms of dictating the other team's field position. You don't oftentimes have somebody on your roster, even the best punters in the league, can't do it to the degree that this kid projects to be able to do that. That if you could continually lock in another 10 to 15 yards or maybe even more of field position differential based on having him versus somebody else, that's the part of it, Chris, where, again, people want to look at it on the surface and like, oh, you're going to spend a pick on a punter there? What you're spending a pick on is that vast differential in field position that you are going to get over the long haul of having him on your roster.
Well, here's the danger in that. Of course, he can punt the ball 70, 75 yards, and that's great. But what that also means is your coverage team can't get down to cover that in time. So you will be punting long. You got a guy who can boot it 70 yards. instead of the normal 45, but your coverage team won't be there. So your special teams coverage better be really good, because the other team is going to be fielding and returning punts at a higher percentage in terms of how much runway they have to get started, right? So rather than that normal, 5-7 yard gap before the defenders are there, somebody could have 15 to 20 yards, of space, or at least, another 4 or 5 yards of space, in order to get started on a return, which could pose some challenges to coverage teams. So that's sort of just a little other side of that sword.
Well, that's a very good point, to be sure. Okay, so in terms of other thoughts here that you guys have that we haven't touched upon yet, I'll start with you, Jason. Thoughts on this 2022 NFL draft? We've done a decent amount tonight to highlight the players that need to be talked about in what is absolutely a thin draft class.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from all of this as we get ready for it to actually go down is whenever you're debating or discussing draft in any year, you're always going to have a certain percentage of people who are going to invoke the Tom Brady nonsense, so we throw that out. But after that, the second most common thing is to say you can get good starting caliber, potentially Pro Bowl caliber players in those middle rounds. And I think this is a great example of how we'll go into this draft, and not every team is going to come out of here with a star. But this is going to be a very good roster-building draft. And for anybody that follows beyond the draft and into free agency and salary cap and all the other deep-rooted factors, we all know that you can't have two $20 million defensive ends. You can't have a $20 million linebacker. You can't have two $20 million corners, and so on and so forth. So at some point, you have to get solid contributors that maybe aren't all-pro level. And that's perfectly fine, because no team in the history has ever been an all-star team. And this just might be one of those beautiful times where you look at these guys and say, okay, I don't need an all-pro. I don't need an all-star. What I need is a guy that can do blank. And you'll be able to find a guy that can do that thing and do it very well, and who knows what will happen after that. So I think this is a very good roster-building draft. I just don't think that if you're, looking at this thinking, I've got to get my next wide receiver one, or I've got to get my next, all-pro middle linebacker, I'd temper your expectations a little bit and just be ready to acquire quality players who may or may not be the face of the franchise.
That's a very interesting perspective. I agree with it completely, Jason. And again, as always, the watchword is value. If teams are sticking to value in the process of this draft, even with the talent level being down from past years, they can still maximize the opportunities that are available this time around. Chris, throw it to you. Your closing thoughts on this draft.
I don't know what Jason means. The Cleveland Browns are trying to have $20 million guys at every single position on the field. You caught that? I thought that's what everybody was trying to do. Listen, I think this is the kind of draft where the teams with the proven scouting departments and front offices that have figured out how to find value, and Rick is going to hate this, maybe this is the kind of draft where the analytics guys do a little better versus the teams that don't have the strong scouting or analytics departments. Hey, I'm looking at you, Cincinnati Bengals. Mike Brown sitting in his office with Athlon Sports and every other magazine he got at Barnes & Noble trying to decide who he's picking. This may not be the draft. This may not be the draft to go cheap and try to figure out how to do that. This could be a draft that ends up being a real stumble for a team like the Bengals because they don't invest in the deep dive on players. So to Jason's point, there are players here to build out a roster. You just got to know where to look. And I would also say that, speaking of analytics, this is the kind of draft where I think we could see a lot of trading down, where guys are going to say, you know what, this guy at the top of the first, I can get, or at the bottom of the first, I can get in, 12, 15, 16 picks later, or a guy just like him. And I think we might see a lot of trading down in the first 3 to 4 rounds in this draft because of that, where teams are sort of cherry picking a guy who specializes in one thing, or his skill set is specific to what they're looking for, to what Jason led us off with, on the show. So let's watch for that when the draft rolls around. How much are teams looking to move down, get some value? Are they looking to punt picks into next year versus picking them up this year? That'll be telling as well. It'll tell you a lot about what they think of this class.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that being the case. The only thing on that is it takes 2 to tango. So it's going to take somebody who's interested in trading up to get a certain player in each of these instances, but that may still happen from time to time. And as far as it goes with the Bengals, the one thing is they're already off to a start in this offseason as far as improving in the most vital area for them, which is offensive line, because as we know, Chris, our boy, the honorary Bobcat Joe Burrow, last year had the functional equivalent of a shower curtain for his offensive line, and they've already taken great steps to make sure that will not be the case again next year. So,
well, and if you're the Bengals and somehow the center out of Iowa falls to you, which he might be there, that's the kind of player they should just grab, because that would be a smart value pick late in the first round at a position where they continue to need to have depth because they've got to protect the franchise.
Absolutely. They got to do a better job on that. But as far as protecting the franchise with the integrity of the best draft coverage you're going to get anywhere, I would dare say the combo of Jones, Morris, Galloway protects that franchise year in and year out here with FDH. And a real pleasure once again, boys. Thank you so much. FDH Lounge Original Dignitaries Jason Jones and Chris Galloway, as we provide you our preview of the 2022 NFL Draft. We will, as always, reconvene after the draft and give you our thoughts on everything that transpired. But again, until then, the three of us will be back together at that time. Thank you, guys, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this mini episode of the FDH Lounge.